Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a film podcast. And for those of you who haven't been here before, with guests, I discuss various films and we talk about the many different ways in which stories are told on film. And about 6 years ago, I heard about By Sidney Lumet, which was directed by Nancy Buirski, which about 5 months ago, when she was on my show, we talked about. And now seeing almost all of her films, she's become one of my favorites. One of my favorite filmmakers, because these stories that we're discussing today are extraordinary. The Loving Story, which was her first feature-length feature, came out in 2011, and then the documentary was 2011, and the narrative feature film was 2016. Which was directed and written by Jeff Nichols and starred Ruth Negga and Joel Egerton. And her new documentary is called A Crime on the Bayou, which is really an extraordinary film. So Nancy, thank you again so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks so much. I wanted to ask, because I know that people have been asking you why these stories. What was it about these stories that pulled you in, that you felt you should tell? And I really liked what you said about it's very much the story of America and how can people not be interested in civil rights and in social injustice. But I'm curious if the fact that your parents were interested in these sorts of issues, do you think that having that growing up made you even more interested in these types of stories? Do you think you'd be telling these stories without their influence?
Oh, I do. I think that I feel a connection to that struggle as a struggle that's foundational to our country. I was also very moved by the heroes involved in these stories. These reluctant and unsung heroes that have moved me ever since I found out about them. I did grow up in a suburb of New York, which was a very large suburb and very ethnically mixed. And I went to a high school which was very integrated, very ethnically mixed. And that was a privilege. But it probably did attune me more to the struggles that had happened prior to that. I think that, it was something that was in the climate, it was in discussion all the time. So I must have felt some connection to it as a result of growing up there. This was New Rochelle. But as I say, I think that I can't imagine people growing up in this country, people who are sensitive to the human condition and to social injustice, not caring about these issues. And so as I feel privileged to have come across these stories and to have had access to the people in the stories and to have felt like we were all in a kind of safe place to tell them. So I don't know. I look back on it and I just really do feel proud to have had that opportunity to tell these stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're so inspiring and really pull you in emotionally. And certainly just for people who perhaps don't know the summary of the stories, just starting with the Loving Story. This is about an interracial couple who fell in love and married at a critical time in American history. And because of a confluence of social and political turmoil, our reluctant heroes bring about changes where previously no one else could. They are paired with two young and ambitious lawyers who are driven to pave the way for civil rights and social justice through a historic Supreme Court ruling, changing the country's story forever. Is that an accurate description, short summary? Thank care of IMDb.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I wish I wrote that. Is it difficult, because you have these three films on civil rights, also the rape of Recy Taylor. Is it difficult to sit emotionally with these stories all these years, two 2 or 3, it's like 6 or 7 or more years of your life. What was that like? Did that take a toll on you?
Robert, I don't even think that I could possibly begin to imagine the toll it takes on Black people. And if I have been, in one way or another, given the opportunity to tell them, I'm not going to worry about myself as much as I am about the people who were more directly affected by these stories. That said, one of the reasons that I do feel compelled to tell them is that I do feel white people are complicit in these stories, and that we have an opportunity, and I should say responsibility, to tell them. And, Angela Davis says in the most recent film, A Crime on the Bayou, she says that, all people should feel harm by what's happened in the country. And she's questioning the word allyship because that comes up in our film. And she says she has a problem with that word because she feels that everybody should be feeling harmed by what had happened in this country. So yes, I feel moved and harmed by it, but I can't begin to imagine. I try to imagine, that's one of the reasons that I made this film, what it must be like to have lived through this. And I hope that my making these films don't preclude the opportunity for Black people to tell these stories as well, because they tell it with through a different lens.
That's a great answer. And I was hesitant I wanted to touch on something you mentioned, and I was hesitant to ask because I was afraid that it may be offensive, but I'll try. I'll give it a shot. But was it difficult telling these stories because you were white? Did anyone give you a hard time about that, or was it very seamless?
I wouldn't say it was seamless. It came up. We discussed it. We made sure that we had a number of Black or people of color associated with the film, either as consultants on our crew, as executive producers. We were concerned about that we would be sensitive to the issues in a way that sometimes white people are not. And so we were very sensitive to that. So it's always been, it's part of the picture of our making these films. And I can appreciate why it's being scrutinized today, why people are asking, should white people tell these stories? Should Black people? I hope that we get to a point in our creative lives that there aren't boundaries put on any stories, because I think we want, Black people to tell stories about white people and white people to tell stories about Black people. But I think we need to be aware of our limitations when we're telling these stories. I think that's a healthy thing. So that's kind of where I come from.
That's a really great perspective. I'm also curious because the Loving story is so extraordinary, but there was a couple of things that I was a little unsure about, which also in the feature film, I imagine it's meant to be ambiguous, but because they went to DC to get married because it was illegal to have interracial marriage in Virginia, and then later they said that they didn't know it was illegal. Now, was that just something they said so that there would perhaps hoping that there would be less conflict?
It's actually, it is an ambiguous point in the movie. It's a really good question. There is the thought, and I can't say this for sure, but there is the hypothesis that Richard Loving knew that it was illegal to come back and live in Virginia, but Mildred did not. That's the hypothesis that some people have.
That's what I thought.
It's possible that Richard didn't know either, but the key here is that they did really think that they felt that they were doing the right thing by getting married, or the legal thing by getting married in Washington, D.C. And at least one of them, if not both of them, felt it would be okay to live in Virginia. Certainly Mildred didn't know she was breaking the law, because when the sheriff barges into her house and says, "Who are you?" And she says, "I'm his wife," and she points to the marriage certificate. She felt that would be enough.
Right.
And clearly it wasn't.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty much what I thought. But I love in films, so whether it's a documentary or a narrative, when the answers are not really spoon fed. And this story really has a number of thought provoking things like that. Is that why you had the sheriff, that the man who was the sheriff from '67 and 1980 in the documentary? Because he said that, oh well, Richard knew what he was doing. Did you interview him? So to kind of.
It wasn't for that particular reason. It was more to give you a sense of the climate and how mixed race couples were being treated during that time, because he was the deputy and he was basically saying, I would have left them alone.
Right.
But it was the Sheriff Brooks who was incredibly strident about these laws. And basically the deputy is implying that he was a bigot, that Brooks was a bigot. And that he was not. So it was interesting to juxtapose the two of them. The deputy was a young man at the time, and Brooks was in charge, and Brooks was determined to arrest them. The other point we make in the film is that there were a lot of couples who lived together, but not that many who got married. And so Richard and Mildred were two of the only ones that did get married, but they did so in Washington, D.C., and then they had, according to Sheriff Brooks, they had the gall of coming back and living in Virginia.
Right.
But the deputy, his attitude was, I would have left them alone. So, that's the story, that Brooks went after them.
And the fact that they, after 8 years in D.C., went back to Virginia. And and you see in the archival footage when they said, oh, they lied and said, oh, we're going back to DC. How did they not get caught? Did that ever come up?
I think it's because the officials at that point knew that this was now going to trial. And they knew that even if they arrested them, they would get bailed out immediately. And it kind of wasn't even worth their while. Once this got caught up in the legal system, they were kind of leaving them alone. If they had come back, and they did get rearrested, soon after, when they came back, she came back to have her first.
Yeah, the baby.
They did get rearrested.
Right.
But it was later when lawyers got involved, and it looked like this, at that point, where they weren't even sure it was going to go to the Supreme Court, but there were a number of trials. And so they were kind of leaving them alone at that point.
I see. That makes sense. The other thing that's so extraordinary about this story, and when we get more into A Crime on the Bayou, is that just on my first impression was, okay, an interracial couple in the South, and my idea of it was, well, they must have been sneaking around all the time, even at home. And what's so extraordinary is that when we think of the South, we think of, total segregation. But these people in this rural community were all living together, blacks and whites. There was no, they were farmers. They worked together, lived together, hung out together. So there was no prejudice. They were not educated to even be taught that there was that existed. Did anyone tell you that was so unexpected? I thought that was really, really surprised me in a good way.
Well, people who are, living in poverty are very dependent on each other. They are farming together. They are there to help them bring in the crops. They don't have the luxury of being of the prejudice that you're referring to.
Right.
And that's what we were seeing in Central Point, which was in Caroline County in Virginia. There are other pockets of that around the country where you would see a lot of people they're living together, working together, and sometimes, marrying together. And remember, there were also Indians in that mix. That's
right.
African Americans, Indians, and whites. and they had to exist together in order to live, to make a living.
Yeah.
It's an agrarian culture, and that they needed each other.
I thought that was so, there was something so incredible about that. But did anyone comment to you that that was something that they really surprised them, that detail surprised them?
I mean, I think it's one of the reveals in the movie.
Yeah.
It's why we make documentaries, so people can enhance their knowledge and learn more about life, things that are maybe a little unexpected.
Yeah. No, I certainly appreciated that, because I think we look at these things often as in black and white terms, and this was clearly not the case in which they were living together. Another thing I wanted to ask was, you told these stories, as you said, from more of a narrative point of view when you ran that documentary festival, seeing so many documentaries over the years. You mentioned that you notice a lot of the times filmmakers were making the stories very conventional. So were you inspired more from feature filmmaking to take a narrative point of view, or a combination of maybe cinema verite documentary filmmaking?
First of all, when the word conventional sounds a little derogatory, and I don't mean it to sound that way. I would say that there were many fine documentaries that I looked at that were told a little not in quite the narrative form that I use. One of the things I loved about running the festival was just seeing such an eclectic mix of documentaries.
Right.
That some of them were verite, some of them were what you might be referring to as conventional, but not with the narrative thrust. I am just in love with stories, and so I'm looking very often for subjects where I feel there's a story arc that I can tell it like a story, and
Right.
And so that's just a personal inclination I have and then I tend to maybe stress that in the structure of my films, but that's just one way of telling it. I happen to admire verite filmmakers enormously, and almost any kind of film. For me, if it's fresh and it has energy in it, and there you can feel the personal, investment on the part of the filmmaker in telling that story. That's what makes a good documentary.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I also want to mention the incredible archival footage by the great filmmaker Hope Ryden that you use. And I love the story that she didn't know where it was, and you asked her to just maybe have a look for it. And it was in a closet. It's the bottom of a closet for God knows how long. And now here we are, where you used it, where they could really tell their stories, it's not like a history lesson from a voiceover from a historian. It's really these people telling the stories, and I really got lost in it. Like, I really feel like I'm a fly on a wall, just like Hope Ryden was when she shot the film. Did she see the documentary?
Yes, she did. I had to stop and think because she did pass away not too long ago.
Oh, she did. Okay.
Yeah. But
okay.
Yes, she did indeed, and she's an example of a very fine verite filmmaker. I had worked very closely with D.A. Pennybaker and Chris Hedges when I started Full Frame, and knew their work extremely well. When Hope Ryden was I was introduced to Hope Ryden's work through the lawyers that are in the movie, the documentary film. Phil Hirschkopf and Bernie Cohn mentioned that she had been there. So
Right.
I had contacted D.A. Pennybaker to see if he knew her, and not only had he known her, but he had worked with her. And he gave me her phone number, and I contacted her. It was a wonderful, kind of coming together of these people.
Yeah.
That had worked together, and I was the beneficiary of their years of work together. They all worked with Robert Drew, as a matter of fact. So Hope Ryden was very proud of that footage and was sorry that she had never been able to make a documentary on the Lovings. And I think that was somewhat a symptom of the times when it was very hard for women to raise money and make their own films.
Right.
So, I think she was very happy to have me use it in the way I did.
How did she respond to by seeing it? Did she was there something that she said about it
She
afterwards?
was proud. She was
Yeah.
proud of, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I love that she was also a character in the feature film. I just love when she was there filming the at the Loving's house. How did you respond emotionally to seeing this story in a narrative in the feature film? What was that like?
Well, I was a producer of that film,
Right.
and I was thrilled. I mean, emotionally, it's what can one say? It's it was a dream to see that come together, and I loved the work that Jeff Nichols did on it. I thought his script was exquisite, and the film itself was just beautiful. So I was just very pleased.
Yeah. No, I thought it was really really great. Was anything in the feature film dramatized? I know that the relationship was something that the director imagined maybe more of what their relationship was like. Was there anything else in terms of the facts that they dramatized, or was it?
It was really very much based on reality.
Yeah.
Very much based on what Jeff had learned not only from my film but his own research, and it was fundamentally a very true film.
I really liked in the feature film. There's a great scene where Richard, played by Joel Egerton, who's phenomenal in it. And when when he's hiding in Virginia and that car is driving so fast as he's on the roof fixing the roof, and to see the paranoia and how much he was telling everybody to run inside, and I thought showing that was so important and crucial, because it just told me so much about what it must have been like to hide and to again be woken up in the middle of the night. But really, they didn't. That's where they lived, and they were going to stand up for.
I think it was very important that Jeff had that scene in there because it reinforced the fact that for so many people, Mildred and Richard had committed a crime. We keep thinking that. We keep thinking, oh, well, people didn't like it, and there was a lot of bigotry and all that. But according to the law in Virginia, they had committed a crime, and and that's a hard thing to get your mind wrapped around. That being married is a crime.
Right. Yeah, I know. It's unbelievable to think that this is only 63 years ago, the late 50s, when they got married, right? So
That's
it's just, I mean, which is really nothing in terms of history. He also really captured the because the lawyers, people were talking about Richard in particular as being reserved, quiet, a man of few words, but Mildred also reserved and quiet, but very articulate. She really, to me, really drove the standing up for the injustice that they were experiencing. I wonder if Richard would have just stayed in DC had she not been the one to say, let's go back, let's have the baby there, I don't care what they're going to do to us. But I thought he captured that, because I often, I don't know how you feel about this, but perhaps filmmakers want to use dialogue in order to have the characters say what they feel, say what they mean. But in this case, to see, particularly in films today, to have the main characters say so little, I thought he captured that. So it was in the behavior and the way in which they were interacting. Was and again, by the great performances by Joel Egerton and Ruth Negga. It was all in their expressions. It was all in what was happening between them. I thought that was really great.
I completely agree with you. I think it's a really good comment, and not only do they deserve a lot of credit, but so does Jeff Nichols, who wrote a script that had very little dialogue in there for them. He knew that he was going to be relying on their just their facial expressions and their body language. He did not put words in their mouth that should not have been there.
Right.
And I was very moved by his restraint in the writing.
Yes, me too. I thought that was I thought that was so perfect. I mean, when I think of the movies where people perhaps don't talk much, it's sort of like a throwback to Steve McQueen, or a movie like Drive, where there's more action. But this is a real story. This is a civil rights story. So I'd never seen anything like that. I thought that was phenomenal. For people who perhaps haven't seen A Crime on the Bayou yet, I just want to also give a very brief summary. Again, care of IMDb. A black teenager bravely challenges the most powerful white supremacists in 1960s Louisiana with the help of a young Jewish attorney. Systemic racism meets its match in decisive courtroom battles, including the U.S. Supreme Court, and a lifelong friendship is born. So I was curious in this case, because this was your third. People are calling it a trilogy. Your third of the civil rights stories, the social justice stories. Why did you feel a third story on civil rights was something you felt you wanted to do?
All three of them, The Loving Story and Rape of Reese Taylor and A Crime on the Bayou, are all connected.
Yeah.
To their exploration of systemic racism, white supremacy. They all have these kind of very noble but humble heroes at the center of the story, and they all look at the personal drama around these people's story, and then we try to put it on a larger canvas. But each one of those stories is quite different from the other.
Oh, yeah.
The Loving Story is about interracial marriage. Rape of Reese Taylor is sadly about the staggering number of rapes that took place in the early part of the century in the South of Black women, rapes and molestation. And then here we have a case where this man is falsely arrested. So that speaks to another very important issue that we are dealing with today, and that is mass incarceration.
Right.
How many Black men and some women, but most often Black men, are either falsely arrested or attacked by officials, police.
Right.
In contemporary days, this is the police that are shooting Black men. We say in the movie that there were many Black men who were shot during that period in Louisiana and other southern states, but we didn't know as much about it because we didn't have the same means of communicating those events. So I feel very strongly about being able to examine these issues that we're dealing with today through the lens of history, because I think it's a reminder that these things have been going on for so long, and it means it's that much harder to correct. It's not
right.
just happening today, but it has this longevity that we have to be aware of. So I don't think it's a question of too many of these stories being told, but they were different enough that I felt warranted of telling of it in the documentary form.
Yes, very, very, very different. And also plenty of similarities, but you're right, very different and all certainly worth telling again and again in such a inspiring and an emotional way. I mean, I was really affected by both the stories enormously. I found, it's interesting how in the case of Perez, the governor at that time.
He was, excuse me, Robert, he wasn't the governor.
Oh.
He was originally a judge. And then eventually he just took on a lot of power because I think he probably ran the city council. I mean, he was the boss of Plaquemines Parish, but he wasn't a governor.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry about that. I thought he was so he wasn't the governor of the state, but he ran that area.
It was unofficially, he was the head.
Okay. And you know, when he was on, you showed that interview of him on Buckley's show, and even some of the comments he was making with some other people. And it's so interesting to me how people justify their hatred and racism by using, in his case, he was using some, as he called it, scientific proof of that black people didn't have morals and that their brains didn't develop past 11. That some scientists told him that, or in the case of Loving, that one judge, again using religion to say, well, if God put all of us on the blacks in one continent, the whites on one continent, and Asians, that obviously he didn't want us to integrate. And you see people are, you know, like you were talking about, you know, the black men getting killed by police officers, and you know, I see nowadays people, the response to that is, well, they also kill white people, or they kill more white people. It's you know, there's always some sort of justification to perpetuate these ongoing problems in history. And I really love the quote by John Lewis at the end of the film saying we need to look at history in order to evolve and make sure it doesn't happen. So seeing that was, you know, it made me so angry. And you know, I know a little bit about Buckley, the writer, and for him to call you a bigot, you must have really been a bigot, as he said there. But when you were doing the interviews with Gary, by the way, for those of you who haven't seen it, he was literally arrested for touching a young white teenager's elbow, which is, you know, ridiculous. Are you ever trying to get an emotional response out of them? Because he gets very emotional, so does the other lawyer's son. Or do you just let them tell their stories?
Oh, yes. I don't try to manipulate in any way. Yeah, their stories are emotional enough as it is.
Yeah.
And you never know. Some people get emotional, some people don't. Some people tell their story and they're fine. But Gary, to this day, continues to get emotional about that time in his life. It was very traumatic.
Yeah.
And Lolis Eric Eli, the son of one of the important lawyers during that time, also does get emotional when he recounts what his father went through. So no, I never would try to push someone to get emotional. It's all there.
Yeah. No, I figured that. Because I've heard of I know William Friedkin made a documentary where in his memoir he talked about it was actually I don't know if you've seen it. It was about a black man on death row, and when he told the story he got emotional, but then on camera it was flat. So he said he tried to get it out of him, and I wondered, because I know more about, you know, working with actors, and I wondered if documentary filmmakers did that, you know, because you see some of these extraordinary moments in documentaries, but as you said, it's
listen, I can't speak for other documentary filmmakers. I can only tell you how I work. It never even would occur to me to try to draw an emotion out of someone.
Yeah.
But I do want them to feel comfortable, and I want them to feel safe too.
Right.
If they feel like they're going to get emotional, I want them to feel safe doing that. And yeah, no, I can't say what other filmmakers do.
Right. No, I thought that was it was really quite moving to see that. What was it like to work with actors on this film? Because, you know, you have them doing voiceover of the trial. Was that your first experience working with actors?
No. I've worked with, with almost all my films, I've had some actors playing a role. I guess, in Afternoon of a Fawn, I was very lucky to work with Marianne Bauer, who read some of Tana Leclerc's letters, and also Michael Stuhlbarg, who is, as you know, a very well-respected actor. He played Jerome Robbins in my film, the voiceover.
Right.
But these actors that came on to read the testimony during the trials of Gary Duncan, were wonderful. They were great. They were found through one of my producers, Vanessa Martino, had done a lot of work researching those parts because their voices needed to sound as authentic as possible.
Yeah, they sounded just like them.
They were amazing.
It was really.
I don't have all their names. I wish I had all their names in front of me so I could read their names off. But I hope when people see the movie, they'll take the time to watch the credits and acknowledge those performances. They were really good.
Yeah, I as we're chatting, I can quickly get it up because it's certainly worth. It's certainly worth mentioning because they were. I mean, I thought it was them. I was listening to someone interview you, and they saw an interviewer thought it was the actual recording because they nailed the voices. I thought perfectly. It was so great. Is there anything about the nature of courage when faced with imprisonment or death that you learned in making telling these stories?
Oh gosh. Again, I've been so privileged not to have gone through any of those events. And yet I must feel a connection in some way because I really felt compelled and driven and passionate about telling these stories. I hope it comes through that this is, what they went through was, I mean, these people were heroes and they risked their lives to stand up to corrupt forces. And that's what I wanted to uplift.
Yeah, I mean.
By the way, I really want to make the point, which I try to do in all of these interviews, that it's never just me. I work with a great bunch of people.
Right.
And we're all very committed to telling these stories. I have, a wonderful team and couldn't do it without them.
No, absolutely. Just looking at some of the actors, forgive me if I missed anyone, but for the voice of Gary Duncan was Skeeta Jenkins, and Richard Sobel was Isaac Connor. Burt Grant was I hope I'm saying this right. Shea Boatswain. And there was Ken Petrie was Sidney Provençal. Alexander Walk, Wayne Scarabin. That's all the ones that are listed anyways. But just unbelievable. Of course, I hope this isn't an annoying question because I know a lot of people ask you about working with Scorsese, of course. When he's an advisor, what kind of specific advice did he give?
He just like he does with many other filmmakers, he's very generous with his time and he looks at the film and he gives you notes on the film.
Right. Is there anything that you specifically can recall that stands out now?
Not right now.
No? Okay. So you're working now on the Midnight Cowboy story. How has that been going?
Well, it's just the very beginning.
Right.
Just starting. We're doing very early research and background conversations with people. So I'll come back on the show at some other time and tell you more about it. It's really too early to talk about it, other than I'm very, very excited about the project. And I'm very grateful to Glenn Frankel, who wrote the book, Shooting Midnight Cowboy.
Yeah, it's a great book.
Art, sex, loneliness, and liberation, and the making of a legend. My film is going to be much less about the making of Midnight Cowboy and more about the moment of Midnight Cowboy. I think, all great art has its moment and very often could not have been made at another time. But it's that time that it was made that helps compel the creative people and define the ultimate art. And that's what I'm interested in here.
Well, I love the book, and I want to thank you again for introducing me to Glenn Frankel, because I had him on the show, and he was wonderful to talk to. And he's such a great speaker as well. So I'm really looking forward to that. just jumping back I wanted to talk a little bit about the lawyers in these stories, because I love the fact that Gary and Richard became such close friends, and that he actually stayed in Louisiana even after winning the case. I know that Gary considered him almost like a father, even though I believe they were, or I believe back.
I think he considered him a very close friend.
Yeah,
and he refers to him as one of the family. So I think their families got to know each other, and they feel, related. Yeah. So I hope I'm not misquoting him. I watched him. He either said father, or maybe you're right. He probably just said a member of the family. But the fact that the lawyers are also really risking their lives. I find that, because we think of lawyers as not usually the nicest people, or but and these are just people that really believed in these causes. I also love did Hope Ryden also do the archival interviews of the lawyers in the Loving story? Is that also her? Okay. Yeah.
I thought they were so great, and also very comical, almost very funny. Some of the arguments they had,
Look, in any profession, you have good people and you have bad people, and
right.
And
that's a good point.
I'm happy that the lawyers in my story are people that we all admire and have wonderful personalities, and
they really did.
One of the challenges too when you're making a film is to try to bring out their personalities. So they're not just kind of, boring. And,
right.
These lawyers who are undertaking cases like this are far from boring. So that was also a privilege to be able to help us get to know them better.
Is there anything that you are conscious of doing to make them more comfortable on the camera, or were they easy to talk to?
I wasn't more conscious of. No, I think they were easy to talk to, and I hope I was easy. I was easy to talk to too, because you do need to make people comfortable. I mean, some people get a little nervous when the lights go on and the camera starts going, but on the other hand, there are a lot of people that it turns them on. They love talking to the cameras. So
right.
You never know what you're going to get.
Right. Yeah. No, I thought that their personalities really shined in it. As I mentioned with the Loving story, just at first having an idea of where the story might go, and then I was totally wrong. In this case, I also thought that when he got arrested, I thought, oh God, don't tell me he was on death row or something and was in jail for 50 years. It's extraordinary that these cases went all the way to the Supreme Court and that they won. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Where can people see A Crime on the Bayou now? I know Shout Factory purchased it, right?
Shout Factory has a microsite called A Crime on the Bayou, and people can check in on that and see where it is playing. It is still in theaters in various parts of the country. And then it will be available digitally in the beginning of August, and it will actually be on television in November. So there are many different ways one can see this film, and they can either go on Shout Factory's microsite called A Crime on the Bayou. They can go on our Facebook page, A Crime on the Bayou, and we also have a Twitter account. So we will try to keep people up to date on various screenings and other opportunities to see the film. I hope they will join us. Please, hope people will join our Facebook page in any case, because we'll continue having conversations about the film. And it won't just be about where it's playing, but what people think about it. We want to hear from you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll leave the links that you mentioned in the description box below. For those of you who are interested, because you've got to see this. You got to see A Crime on the Bayou, and Loving, the Loving story and Loving. What's the best place to find those nowadays?
They're both on HBO Max.
HBO Max. Okay, great. I'll also leave any links in the description box for those of you who haven't seen both the documentary, The Loving Story, and the feature film.
Right. By the way, I may be incorrect about it. Maybe HBO now. I think people would, they're HBO. So I'm sometimes a little confused about which of the strands it's on, but people can check that.
Okay. Okay, great. Very good. Well, Nancy, thank you again. I always really enjoy our conversations. You know, by Cindy Lumet, and now these 3 different projects. I still have to see The Rape of Reese Taylor, so I am going to watch that soon. And Midnight Cowboy is one of my favorite movies. So, and I love the book, so I'm really looking forward to seeing the documentary on that. And I want to thank those of you who tuned in live. And this podcast is available anytime on my YouTube channel, and it is now an audio version as well on Spotify and Amazon and various platforms. I'll leave those links in the description box as well. If this is your first time on my channel, please consider subscribing. It is absolutely free. You'll see the subscribe button right beside the description box below, and then there's a little bell you can click, which will give you a notification every time I go live or release a new video. Nancy, thanks so much again. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
It's always a pleasure, Robert. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much.